So we'll go ahead and pick up with Robots in Disguise, issue number 5. Written by John Barber, art by Andrew Griffith, additional art by Casey Collar, colors by Josh Perez, letters by Sean Lee, edits by Carlos Guzman. And this issue opens with a ship returning to Cybertron, a ship that heard the call that the war was over, come home. And the ship is carrying Skybite, who is greeted by Metal Hawk and Starscream, of which Skybite is aware, at least of Starscream, by reputation, as he puts it, of a liar and a killer, in short, a Decepticon. So Metal Hawk kind of takes over the introductions. And as Metal Hawk tries to initiate him, for lack of a better term, into modern Cybertronian culture, he takes him around, Skybite that is, and introduces him to the term nail. And they meet an Autobot, or I guess I should say a recovering Autobot, a current nail, but was once an Autobot named Zetka, who informs Metal Hawk as to what a nail is, and also advises him that the Decepticons don't walk freely around here, that the Autobots implanted them with inhibitor deterrence chips so they can't change modes, and if they do, they get blown to smithereens. To which Skybite says, Primus, the Autobots sound just as bad. And that's where Skybite kind of takes on the identity of a nail. Now, another character that's kind of dealt with in this issue is Ironhide, who observes where Skybite's ship coming in. And you get a little bit of an introspective look into what's going on with him. But he says that he found the future in the modern Cybertron. And he has a little bit of an introspective consideration where he says, I've learned it's all about disguise and change. We Cybertronians hide what we are from each other, from ourselves. And when we look right at something, we can't even see how it's changing. We can't tell what's what, even when it's right in front of us. Which is a bit of foreshadowing as he kind of tracks down Skybite, who is sort of sifting through the rubble of a bunch of dead sweeps, and reintroduces himself and makes it clear that he is well aware of who Skybite is. And he gives Skybite an escort back to Iacon, where he encourages Skybite not to align himself with any one faction, to take a look at the landscape, talk to Metal Hawk, talk to the Decepticons, see what makes the most sense. And Skybite's kind of taken back by that, but it's another recognition that things there have changed. Now, once back at Iacon, Ironhide rendezvous with Blurr, who expresses that he's having problems changing from modes and is causing a fair bit of pain, but also, more importantly, at least for the future, that he's considering opening a bar, a place for foot traffic, for people to gather in a peaceful fashion. And Ironhide kind of co-signs that idea and gives him not only his blessing, but the thought of it being really a positive thing for the entire planet. And all of this is really a setup for this moment, which is where Prowl and Bumblebee are interrupted by Metal Hawk and Starscream. And Metal Hawk says that he informed Skybite of the ID chips, and Skybite recoiled at the thought. And he's correct. He goes on to say, I went along with you at first, but now I see you creating a dangerous underclass with nothing to lose. It isn't a solution. Look at Starscream. He's a perfect example of how a Decepticon, even with the worst reputation, can turn around and people trust Starscream after he offered us protection. But even the kind of concept of this conversation is enough for sort of Prowl to disappear out the back door, as it were. But we'll get back to that in a bit. Meanwhile, Skybite takes Ironhide's advice and meets up with some Decepticons to sort of get their point of view. And he gets up with none other than Swindle, who informs him that not only did Prowl execute Ratbat, but then he went on to execute the Constructicons. And Skybite kind of gives him some pushback to suggest that he has a history with the Constructicons that wasn't pleasant, and he can kind of understand how things could go south. But what's important about this is that we realize that this is also the location where Needlenose is sort of looking after Dirge, who Prowl has been after. And as they're meeting, they realize that they're interrupted by two Autobots that are kind of, seemingly on patrol, Sideswipe and Streetwise. And while they take notice of them, I think it causes enough of a distraction for Prowl to kind of get the drop on Swindle. So now we have basically a situation where Streetwise, Sideswipe, and Prowl are facing off against Swindle, Needlenose, and potentially Skybite, who was at one point a Decepticon. And of course, a fight ensues. Shots are fired, Streetwise is lit on fire. Ultimately, Swindle and Dirge escape, and Needlenose and Skybite are taken into custody. And as they're exiting the structure with their two captives, they're approached by a group of nails who now see some of these quote-unquote former Decepticons, as well as Skybite, as just associated with other Decepticons that they've now had run-ins with, namely Skywarp. And as a result, they begin attacking the captors. The scene quickly turns into chaos, and Prowl calls for backup, which brings in Metal Hawk, Starscream, Bumblebee, and Ironhide. And as they arrive, they kind of notice the chaos. And if you look closely, there's a few cameos in there, including an Alicon as well as T-Bob from Mask, which is pretty funny. But Ironhide, of course, is the one that kind of first steps into action, putting hands and feet on anybody within arm's reach. And this sort of brings us to the climax of the issue, where Ironhide, after he's kind of neutralized the situation, let's say, steps in to protect Skybite from Prowl. And he says to Prowl, "We can't live like this. Metalhawk's right, and I hate to say it, but Starscream's right too. You made the ID chips to keep us safe from Decepticons because that's all we know. But that's our past. There's a whole new future out there where none of that old stuff matters. Tomorrow's the only thing we got. It's all we've ever had." And Prowl says, "You want to turn off the ID chips? What happens? What happens when the Decepticons attack again?" And Ironhide says, "We'll stop them. We did it before. B, it's your call." And kind of leaves that decision in Bumblebee's hands. And Bumblebee chooses to deactivate the chips, which brings us to our conclusion, which takes place in Blurr's new bar that's just kind of getting up and running. And Prowl obviously expresses his discontent for how the circumstances have played out regarding inhibitor chips. And Ironhide closes with telling him that he did what he did because he had a vision of the future that was peaceful and bright. He says, "See, I know I survive. I don't die again, so I got nothing to worry about. The future's going to be bright." And Prowl says, "And what about the rest of us? What about Cybertron?" And Ironhide closes with, "I said it was peaceful, Prowl. See, in the future, the rest of you and all your grudges are all dead." And that's how the book concludes. So this is ultimately a setup issue and a pivot issue, right? It's kind of concluding the arc of Robots in Disguise, allowing the issues of More Than Meets the Eye to kind of step back in and then pick up with a new arc with Robots in Disguise later on, which, while necessary, doesn't necessarily create the most kind of engaging issue because we're just getting started into like a new story and a new idea. But what is important about this issue, setup-wise, is this is the first time that we see an Autobot, not just any Autobot, right? An Autobot with some real rank and file behind them. Ironhide, right? Seasoned soldier, veteran, et cetera, stepping up to kind of believe in the new future, the new idea of seeing things. And he does think that he's seeing this new idea, right? Because he's also seen this vision. It's all about what you see. It's all about seeing the truth, which is why earlier on in the issue, he expresses that a lot of Transformers, Autobots, and Decepticons can't see the truth right in front of them because they're so used to looking at things change that they forget that the overall change is happening right in front of them, which is, an elegant kind of way to word all that. And nicely done and executed. But this is the first time that, like I said, an Autobot with real kind of like stripes, street cred, for lack of a better term, kind of concedes to the new vision, right? The Metalhawk vision, the Starscream, theoretically, vision of a Cybertron where everybody's kind of equal, and the whole thing of it is backlit against this bar idea from Blurr, which is supposed to create the environment that's the same, right? It's like a petri dish, hyper-focused microscopic element of the larger goal of bringing everybody together in this one peaceful place. And both of those things are sort of happening simultaneously, with one being a sort of micro example of the other. And the only question is whether or not it will play out. And, what's a story without drama? So more than likely it will not. But only time will tell. However, we do know that a character like Ironhide was probably one of the bots that Prowl depended on to kind of be like real muscle behind him. And with him sort of tipping his scales the other way, an Autobot like Prowl with contingency plan after contingency plan and kind of always playing 8D chess, as it were, has to reconfigure a few pieces on the game board. And we'll get back to that later. And I'll be back a couple weeks with another installment, moving on to More Than Meets the Eye, issue number 4. With that being said, I hope that helps. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.